So
Yeah.
thank you everyone for being here. And today we have two talks. The first one is by Maria on epidemiology, which is very topical. She'll be discussing the current coronavirus epidemic that's happening. So I hope everyone is excited. And the way we'll address questions during this is if you just press on the show conversation button on your screen, it will open a tab to the side that will have the chat on. And you can type out your question and one of the committee members will read it out in due course. All questions will be addressed and there will also be a question and answer session in the end. I'll hand over to Maria.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. So let's start. So epidemiology, what is it? So basically it's the study and analysis of the distribution, so who, when and where, patterns and determinants of health and disease conditions in defined populations. Why do we study? Well, I think it's fairly obvious now why we want to study this. It's kind of important. So in particular, I'm going to talk about compartmental models. So what's a compartmental model? It's basically you have compartments and you put people in different compartments according to some key characteristic that you assume that they have. So basically, you take the whole population and then you make them into groups. So yeah, this doesn't seem very realistic because, everyone's different, but all models are wrong, but some are useful. I like that quote. So yeah, so let's start with the most basic model, which is really the background and the basics for all the other models that I'll tell you about today. And that's the SIR model, which stands for susceptible, infectious, and recover. So here we assume that, there are three compartments. If you're on the susceptible one, then you can have the disease. Once you're at the infectious one, then you have the disease and you are infecting people. And then we assume that once you've survived the disease, you are recovered. So you don't infect people anymore, and also you can't get the disease anymore. And sometimes the R compartment is called remove compartment. So if you have people dying, then you can put them in here. And mathematically, it's really the same. So, what are the equations? Because, this is a fairly applied maths, but still we want some maths. This is our system of differential equations. We have some parameters here, which are beta and gamma. The first term is the people that's switching from the susceptible to the infectious compartment. So it depends on both the number of infected individuals that you have and the number of people that can get infected. So you take them from the susceptible compartment and you put it in the infected compartment, and so that goes there. And then you also have gamma, which is your recovery rate. So that's the rate at which people from the infected people recovered, and so they go to the R. So some comments here. We are fixing the number of individuals in the whole population, so the sum is n, and it is fixed. We are ignoring what the so-called vital dynamics, so the rate at which people die and they give birth to other individuals due to natural causes. But the reason why a priori it's a good thing to do, it's a reasonable assumption, is that the timescales involved in the spread of a disease are much shorter than the, say, human lifespan, so it doesn't affect a lot the dynamics, although you can include further terms here to account for those natural birth and deaths. And if you want to do that, you could go to part 2 math bio, and that's just bookwork from there. But anyway, so the SAR model, it's used to model a lot of diseases such as rubella, mumps, measles. So yeah, it's a very important one. And one further comment is that if you read around, the terms here sometimes appear divided by n, and there as well. So it's kind of like a different rescaling, and then it really depends on the fraction of the population that are infected rather than the whole of the population. But it's really the same. Yeah, the reason I'm sticking with it is that in our math bio notes, it's done in this way. But if you want the other way, if you maybe read the Wikipedia page, you'll find the other thing. But it's really not important for us. So, okay, let's kind of study the equations here. So when can an epidemic occur? There's one equilibrium in which there's no disease, and that's where the whole population is healthy. And so we start with 0 infected individuals. And if you linearize about that, you plug n instead of s, and then you get this, the linear system for the infected people. And here I've divided R0, is beta times n over gamma. So if R0 is greater than 1, then this grows exponentially and there's an epidemic. If R0 is less than 1, there's no epidemic. And so this R is called the basic reproductive ratio. And if you've heard the news lately, it's the thing that we want to keep below 1 with coronavirus, because then the epidemic will die. So yeah, it's a really important number. And you can see that you just get it from here. It will appear like in later models that we'll see, although in some cases it might be slightly modified if we introduce further parameters. But basically the intuition behind it, it's the number of people that will get infected if you just put one infected individual into the whole population per unit of time. That's what you divide by a gamma. Let's move on. So we can study the trajectories in the IS plane. Yeah, just one quick note. We can't really forget about R, because if you go back here, once you fix this, it doesn't really matter what's happening with the recovered people. We are usually not interested in how this function evolves. So yeah, I'll focus on INS. Maybe I'll go a little bit fast with the maths, but you can check it later. You can set this up, and then you can integrate, and then you have the trajectories in the IS plane, and then you can draw the first portrait. If you start here, which most individuals are healthy, then it will just get here. And this line here is the line I plus S equals 10, because, well, you can not end with more people that you had before. So really only this triangle is the relevant region in the plane. One interesting thing is that at the end of the epidemic, when there's no infected people, so here in the success, for some solutions, well, actually for most, you end up with a non-trivial amount of people in the S compartment. So some people never get infected and the epidemic dies. So that's what I think some people have been calling herd immunity. You may have heard that in the news, which is basically you let a lot of people in the population get infected, and then the epidemic will naturally die out without absolutely everyone getting infected, because still there's some people here who have been healthy throughout. And yeah, quick note, I've taken this picture from Professor Gauck's notes for Part 2 Math Bio, which indeed I would recommend if you want to read more about this on other topics in Math Bio. So this is the famous curve that we want to flatten. How do we get this? Well, we can solve numerically the ODs that we had before. Obviously, they depend on the initial conditions and they depend on R0. We saw that if R0 is less than 1, then this bump just wouldn't happen. There will be no infected people, basically, once the time has passed. But for R0 greater than 1, then we have the exponential growth here. And then, well, the linear analysis is not longer valid, so it behaves differently and then it will die. Yeah, and so these are the susceptible people and the removed people as well. There's an analytic solution. Well, you can sort of integrate it up. If you want, it's on Wikipedia and you end up with an integral, which I think you can't really do. But if you want to look at that, then go ahead. Let's move on. We can model the effect of vaccination, say. So let's assume that you vaccinate a proportion P of your whole population. So let's assume, for simplicity, that vaccines are perfect. So once you got enough vaccine, then you can get the infection. It's not really hard to trick it if, with some probability the vaccine works and with another probability, well, it doesn't work. But let's assume it works always. So then, at least initially, instead of having the whole people getting infected, the number of people that get infected is going to be diminished by a factor of 1 minus p. So yeah, let's initially, because well, once you've actually gotten a lot of people infected, then basically you will just have vaccinated people who are healthy, so the epidemic will die. But essentially, at least for early times, you just replace beta by beta times 1 minus p, and then instead of having the previous R naught, which was beta times n over gamma, you have beta times 1 minus p times n over gamma. So if you manage to get this below 1, then you have no epidemic. So basically, you can work out from here, where here R naught is beta times n over gamma, so the original one. If you can get this, then you won't get an epidemic. So you don't really need to vaccinate everyone, just a significant proportion of the population, and then you'll stop the epidemic. Okay, so that was just bookwork from MathBio. But what if instead of vaccinating a proportion P of the population, we put them into quarantine? So like assume full lockdown, and assuming that you cannot get infected if you are quarantined, then you just need to quarantine a proportion P of the population, and then you'll stop the epidemic, at least if you do that initially, yes. So yeah, so that's the whole thing we've been hearing about, and the reason why we are doing all this online. If the rate of infection decreases, or like you make it to effectively decrease, then you can stop the epidemic. So yeah, stay at home, guys. Okay, yeah, let's move on to another model, which is the SIS model. So this one is used for like common flu and influenza, and the way it works is that you assume that you aren't going to die because of the infection, so you'll recover, and once you're healthy, you'll be back to the susceptible compartment. And what this means is that you don't get immunity after the disease. So for example, for flu, we have flu every year, and it doesn't matter whether you had flu last year or not, you can still get it this year. So that's why it's just switching back and forth from each of the components. The equations are simpler, I'll say. So it's the same rate, beta is I into the infectious compartment, and then you go back to the previous one. At the recovery rate, well, you keep S plus I fixed to the end, the whole population, and then, well, you put the second one to the first, and you get that one, which is the logistic equation after some rescaling for the infected people. So, well, if you don't remember the solution, you can work it out yourself, but it looks like this, and well, A is just depends on initial conditions. And so, well, that's the shape of the solutions, at least for R greater than 1. For R less than 1, then only I equals naught is the only relevant fixed point, and it's just stable, so again, there's no epidemic. For R naught greater than 1, the like healthy equilibrium becomes unstable, and the other one, I equals gamma times R naught minus 1 over beta, is stable, so the number of infected people will just tend to it and stay there. So that was it about the previous model. So one that's a bit more complicated is the SEIR model, which is it's the SIR model with an extra compartment due to exposed people. And this is helpful when we have a disease that has an incubation period during which the individuals have been infected but are not yet infecting people. So, well, we can set the equations to be like this again, ignoring like natural dynamics, births and deaths. You have people switching to the exposed compartment at a rate that depends on both the number of infected people and the susceptible people. And then once you are in the exposed compartment, then at a constant rate you switch to the infectious people, to the infectious compartment. And then from being infected, well, you recover again. Yeah, and here we assume that you acquire immunity once you've had the disease. And then we keep the whole number fixed, and the equations that we get, it's not really that much complicated. So here the incubation period time, it's like a random variable, but here on average is 1 over A, and A is the rate at which they are switching to the infectious compartment. And so should this make a difference compared to the SIR model? Well, I think it's going to be sort of like a time lag, a time delay, because the people that you're getting infected at some time will depend on the number of people that you had infected at time t before. So it should be a bit different from the SIR model. But well, again, we can linearize about the disease-free equilibrium when the whole population is healthy. And just looking at the exposed and infected people, you have your Jacobian, and then, well, you can compute the determinant and the trace. And then, well, I've again said R naught to be beta times n over gamma. And so if R naught is less than 1, the determinant is positive, the trace is negative, so both eigenvalues are negative. So there's not going to be an epidemic. So I think this is the more mathematical part of the whole talk. If anyone doesn't get this, let me know. Yeah, so basically it's a stable fixed point of your system, so there's no epidemic if R naught is less than 1. Again, the same thing as before. Yeah, so that's basically how you play with it. Now let's move on to another model. Here we are introducing the compartment of the carrier state. How this works is that some people who have had the disease never completely recover, and they continue to carry it. They don't have the disease, they don't have the symptoms themselves. And what's kind of interesting is that they may then move back to the infectious compartment and suffer the symptoms and infect people and then go back to the carrier state. And also while they are on the carrier state, they can infect people. So here, well, you'll see the equations now, but the people that are getting infected, there's some term that depends on the people that are actually on the infected compartment. And then there's another analogous term that depends on the people that are number of people that you have on the carrier compartment, because they are also infecting people even though they are not technically infected. And these are the rates of switching from infected to carrier and from carrier to infected. And also once you are infected, then you can recover as usual. This has been seen, for example, tuberculosis. There's someone who had the typhoid fever. Well, she was called Mary Mallon, and she infected 50 people with typhoid fever while she wasn't really suffering the symptoms herself, so she was healthy, but she was infecting people. And so yeah, it's really interesting if you want to read the Wikipedia page, and that it was kind of, yeah, interesting. Well, and these are the equations. I must say that I didn't find the actual equations for this particular model. I just put them the way I thought made sense, but don't trust me. But I think this is sort of reasonable. So here are the people going into the infected compartment, and also, yeah, these are the people that get infected due to the people on the carrier state, but they go into the infected compartment, so here. And then, yeah, these are the sort of stochastic change from carrier to infectious and from infectious to carrier. And then R as usual, and then we fix all of them. If you want to try to find equilibrium and all that, go ahead. But yeah, I'll move into other compartmental models more in how you could understand this, because, well, you really need to have something that accurately describes the disease that you have. So one common example is the MSIR model. And what this does is has some passive immunity that individuals have once they are born. For example, occurs in measles. So people are born with immunity due to maternal antibodies. The mom passed them to the babies. But once they grow, they lose that immunity, so they become susceptible. And then it's the SIR model as usual, so you can get infected and recover. So another one is that you could make is SEIS. So it's a mix of the SIER model and the one we saw for the flu. So here you have an exposure time, but you don't get immunity at the end, so you get back to the Earth. Then you just can't play with all of these together. You can't put an M in front, so you get immunity, and then you have an exposed time. And then, well, you can put an M here and an E there, but I think what's important of this one is that you can get temporal immunity, so you are on the recover compartment for a bit. Then you go back to being susceptible, so you get back to S. You can really play with all of this, it's kind of fun. And then this one is the SI model for zombies. So here you are either healthy or infected, and there's no recovery, you just stay infected forever. Mathematically, it's kind of fairly easy to solve. At the end, I've put at the reference, there's a whole book on mathematical modeling of zombies, of like how a zombie invasion will be, and basically how it is spread like in a space and in time. So yeah, it's kind of surprising that some people voted to do that, but it's fun. And yeah, so coming back to coronavirus and everything that we've heard these days, so you can put one compartment for asymptomatic people. So technically, I think this will be infected people, but they will have different rates, because if you're asymptomatic, then there's a chance that you haven't been tested and then you don't know that you get it. So the rate at which you are spreading people the disease is, well, either, I guess it's slower if you don't have symptoms because you are not coughing and all that. Yeah, but like maybe you're interacting more with people, so maybe it's higher. I don't know, but like theoretically you could put a compartment from them and it will alter somehow the dynamics. And then you can have a compartment for quarantine people. So here, I don't mean it in the same way as I did at the beginning with vaccines. Here I mean, well, if I test someone and that individual tests positive, then I put her into quarantine. And then whenever that person tests negative, then it just gets back to normal. So an interesting effect, which I hope it's not significant in the real world, but is that what if you have false negatives and false positives, because you can put people into the quarantine compartment and then they think they have it, they think they've gone through it, they test, and then they test negative after that. They think they are recovered, so they will like interact and all that because they think they've gone through the disease, but because it was a false positive in the beginning, they really haven't had the disease, so they are not immune to it, they can get it. But anyway, you can play with all that, and I think it's quite fun and interesting, and also quite flexible to like take into account effects that you want to take into account. So yeah, so going beyond, I mentioned it a bit at the beginning, vital dynamics, you can add variables and that. You can put like age structure populations. So I think this is important, say for the mortality rate, if you have something like COVID, which the rates are really uneven depending on your age, and also it depends on like the interaction that you have with other people. So maybe if you're young, then you interact more with other people because you still go out and all that. Well, you can take into account like sex and other subpopulations that you may want to make. For example, like, well, children at school, well, I guess that's more age. Maybe you have something that affects unevenly women and men, so that's, you want to take into account their sex. And you can add a spatial structure. So here we are assuming that everything mixes with everything perfectly, and it's just like a point in a space. But in reality, this is not really like that. Like countries are very big. So that's an interesting effect. And if you're very curious, you can go to, so in MathBio, one of the problems that we did on, I think it's example sheet 4, there's a wave, and well, if you add some diffusion terms into a space, then you can make a similar like linear analysis around the fixed point, and you can get a traveling wave solution, and then you can find like what's the speed of that wave moving in space and time. So yeah, so have a look at that if you're interested.
Maria, I have a question at this.
Yeah.
So you can like keep adding compartments and it will get more and more accurate, but typically in real life, how many compartments do they usually stop at? Like the current situation with the coronavirus, how many compartments is accurate enough?
So, well, I think for coronavirus, well, they don't have the maternally derived immunity thing. I think they have the asymptomatics one, and I don't know if they have the quarantine. I don't think the quarantine one really helps. I think what they have currently is like a parameter that they can turn on and turn off, which accounts for like lockdown or not. And so that changed a lot the kind of interaction rate, and so the rate at which the disease spreads. So I guess in general, the more the better. And I think they are, and when is it accurate enough? Oof, well, I don't know. I'm not an epidemiologist, but well, everything here like basically is solved numerically. So it doesn't really cost much to add something. And as far as I'm aware, they are. I've seen a paper at least in which they are taking into like account the age structure. So they are grouping people into like year groups of within 5 years, and they are doing that up to like 100 years. So it's actually quite a lot of compartments. But well, I guess you just run the code, and it's not really a problem of like, oh, it's really more complex or harder to solve. Well, yeah, like analytically, you can hardly do anything. So yeah, that's what I'll say.
Thank you. Yeah, that helps.
Yeah.
Shavindra asked, how accurate are these models in practice when compared to real-life epidemics?
Ooh. I think, as far as I'm aware, they use like obviously they don't just use the same model that I've told you about, but like maybe it has some tweaks because, well, this is just like the basic one, introductory one, but I don't think it's like fairly different what they are using. And I think it's fairly accurate. But yeah, at the moment, I think it's a bit of like trial and error because you are doing it live, like with the current pandemic going on. Whereas like if I had I done this like a year ago, then I'll tell you, well, you have all the data already collected, and then you just try to find like which parameter helps. Like it's like whether schools are open or not, or like is it social distancing or what is it? But I think so like a posteriori, it's kind of fairly not easy, but you can get a model that will somehow be accurate to what happened because you are just trying your model to be similar to what happened. But now, in terms of like making predictions, well, I don't really know, but I hope they are somehow right. And so one fun thing is that when we saw this in math bio, like I don't know whether that was like mid-February or something, we plug in the numbers for like we estimated R naught for coronavirus, and we put the whole population to be just the population of Wuhan, the city in China where everything started. And it ended up being like at the end there were going to be like between 5 to 8 million people infected, and we all thought like, oh, seriously, that cannot be true, that's too much. But now really I think there's some truth in these models.
Yeah, thank you. There are no further questions for now. We can move on.
Okay, great. Oh yeah, so sorry, I think I have some notes here on like things that I could say. So yeah, so in reality, you need to estimate R naught, and R naught changes in time in reality because everything we've said, because of like social distancing, and well, maybe you get more, like you have better medical care or worse medical care depending on how much people you have infected. So maybe people are going through the disease faster, so that changes. But in general, yes, estimating R naught, I think that's quite hard because, well, also at the moment, like how many people are you getting tested? Because I think there are a lot of asymptomatic people that we don't really know they are, like we ourselves might be asymptomatics. So yeah, it's not really that simple to model an epidemic. I'll say that. But yeah, also other things you could add. So you cannot external infections hidden. If you have travelers, it's just like a constant input into your equation, so it doesn't depend on the people that you have. So this might be like returning travelers. If your country at the moment has no cases, and you have people that are coming back to your country at whatever function that you want them to be coming at whatever rate, then you can put that in, and that also moves everything without actually depending on the people that you yourself in your country have infected, but people just coming from elsewhere. So that might have been useful when it hadn't gotten everywhere, but people were coming from, say, from China or from Italy, and they were coming back to the UK or anywhere. And so that was like a constant input that you had into your model. So like you just had them explicitly into like your dynamic equations. And then something else I've seen is like stochastic models or hybrid models where you kind of take into account probabilities rather than just differential equations. But yeah, I guess that's not the purpose of the talk. So I'll stop here and yeah, go ahead with questions if there are any. And yeah, and thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah,
Thank you, Maria, for the wonderful talk. And the slides will be uploaded in the talks channel. We'll take questions for the next few minutes. You can keep it.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask whether does it make a difference if you model the parameters, for example, beta and gamma, as distributions rather than set values? So, for example, if different people are differently infectious, does that work?
Yeah. So one thing that I've seen is when you do, say, the age structure thing, you do it continuously on age. If you try to do it that way rather than just children, teenagers, adults, the elderly, if you do it continuously, then you basically have data distribution for your parameters. I think the main point there is that that's really hard to solve because the math just gets more complicated, and well, I don't really know. I guess that will help, but yeah, it might help if you're saying like the older you get, the more likely you are to die. So yeah, but I just don't know how that would work mathematically, and it might be trickier.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll address questions as they come along. Meanwhile, thank you everyone for attending this talk. And thank you, Maria, for the talk again.
Sorry, I have a feedback form. If anyone that listens has any like suggestions or wants to say, like want to rate me anonymously, so I'll send it here. I'll be grateful if you could fill that. Yeah, that's it.
We'll add the link to the form as well. So
please
fill the form. That'll be great. If you enjoyed this talk, we also have a talk later this month, which is by Julia Gog herself, who is currently advising the government, and that should be an exciting talk. It might be cancelled because she's really busy, but if it does happen, stay tuned and keep following our emails. If you're watching this on YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe. We are uploading these talks on YouTube.